Contextualism is the view that the truth conditions of knowledge attributions are fixed by the standards of knowledge that are in place in the attributist context. In the paper that Cohen presented to us this morning, he defends contextualism against an objection that has been raised, among others, by John Hawthorne. I'll begin by stating what I take to be the gist of that objection, which involves two subjects, each of whom makes a knowledge attribution. One subject is in a low standard context, the other in a high standard context. Let's refer to the first subject as Lin, as in low standards, and to the second as Hell, as in high standards. I think in the original paper by Tu's paper, it's Smith and Jones, but then I get confused who is in which context, so I'll switch to Lin and Hell. Low standards, Lin attributes to herself knowledge of her feet. Now, I think that's Hawthorne who switched to a different part of the anatomy, but feet works just as well as hands. So she says, I know that I have feet. Now, suppose that high standards Hell, for whatever reason, wishes to report to someone else what Lin said. So Hell is going to say this, Proposition 1 on the handout. Lin said, I know I have feet. Next, we need to make a further assumption. Hell is a contextualist. So Hell is convinced that the truth value of Lin's knowledge attribution is fixed by the low standards of knowledge that are in place in Lin's context. Since Lin's epistemic position vis-a-vis her feet satisfies low standards of knowledge, Hell will consider Lin's knowledge attribution true. So he will judge that, too, what Lin said is true. But if Hell accepts both propositions 1 and 2, then surely he is in a position to disquote 1 and assert 3. Lin knows that she has feet. But now let's take into account that Hell is in a high standards context. Since Hell is a contextualist, and since Lin's epistemic position vis-a-vis her feet does not satisfy high standards of knowledge, Hell must judge that Proposition 3 is false. It would appear then that contextualism generates a kind of paradox. Hell, the contextualist, must both assert and deny 3. To avoid this paradox, it would seem, contextualists must abandon the thought that we can move from 1 and 2 to 3. But that thought is extremely plausible. So it looks like contextualism is burdened with a seriously implausible consequence. Steu's response, I take it, is that contextualists should distinguish between knowing by low standards and knowing by high standards. When Hell disquotes Lin, what he asserts is 3a. Lin knows by low standards that she has feet, whereas when he assesses by his own lights whether or not Lin knows that she has feet, what he denies is 3b. Lin knows by high standards that she has feet. Clearly then what Hell asserts and what he denies differs. Hence there's no paradox. On the face of it, this looks like a straightforward response, but it actually amounts to a deviation from what we might call the contextualist core principle, which goes like this. When an interpreter A makes a knowledge ascription and skeptical alternatives or error possibilities are salient in A's context, then when using the word know, A means know by high standards. This principle implies that when Hell utters a sentence such as 3, the high standards of his own context bring it about that 3 is false. For Lin's epistemic position vis-a-vis her feet does not satisfy high standards of knowledge. Consequently, as a contextualist, Hell should deny 3. So given the contextualist core principle, it's hard to see why Hell should be able to disquote Lin, thus asserting 3. Put differently, how can it be that Hell, within one and the same context, can both assert and deny 3? How can it be that Hell, again within one and the same context, can mean two different things when using the word know? According to Steup, The answer lies in an addendum with which contextualism must be embellished. This addendum declares, when it comes to disquotation, an exception to the contextualist core principle. Contextualism, when modified in this way, is the following theory: contextualism plus. When an attributor A utters that S knows that P, what A means by the word know is fixed by the standards of knowledge in A's context, except when A reports a knowledge ascription made by another attributor B. In that case, what A means by the word know is fixed by the standards of not A's but B's context. Contextualism plus is not burdened with the disquotational paradox, and in light of the evidence through cites, the example involving basketball players, the addendum seems well motivated. However, declaring an exception to the contextualist core principle creates a problem for plus-type contextualists. Once the door is opened to let in an exception, it will be difficult to shut it again when critics of contextualism point out that there are good reasons to admit even further exceptions. If too many exceptions are admitted, then contextualism might lose its distinctive identity. Next, I will consider another exception that's called for. One problem for contextualism arises from reporting and disquoting knowledge attributions made by others. Another problem arises from the fact that when error possibilities become salient, not everybody responds to the upward pressure on the standards of knowledge by shifting to a high standard meaning of the word know. Consider, for example, Roderick Chisholm. When he discussed skeptical scenarios, he insisted he knew they didn't obtain. He also insisted that he had knowledge of the external world, even though his evidence did not entail the falsehood of skeptical hypotheses. So here we have an example of an attributor who ascribed to himself knowledge of his hands, among other things, in what appears to be a high standard context. If Chisholm's context, when he was in the seminar room discussing skepticism, was indeed a high standards context, then contextualism implies that Chisholm, one of the great figures of 20th century epistemology, was on those occasions confused what he meant by the word know. That's not a plausible consequence. Stu actually acknowledges elsewhere that a subject can resist the upward pressure towards higher standards that's generated by mentioning skeptical hypotheses. So perhaps Stu would not want to say that when Chisholm used the word know in contexts in which skeptical alternatives were salient, he was confused about what he meant by that word. Perhaps Stu would say instead that Chisholm remained unaffected by any upward pressure on the standards of knowledge, and as far as his own use of the word know went, succeeded in employing a low standard meaning of know, even though error possibilities were salient. So then we get a second exception to the contextualist core principle. The first exception is that things are different when subjects report and disquote knowledge attributions made by others. The second exception is that things are different when subjects simply refuse to bow to whatever upward pressure might come from their conversational environment. Let contextualism double plus refer to the kind of contextualism that incorporates both of these exceptions. Contextualism double plus, it seems to me, is a bit watered down. What remains is the thesis that error possibilities made salient by conversational context sometimes do and sometimes do not fix the meaning/truth conditions of knowledge attributions. That doesn't strike me as such a controversial thesis. If that's what's distinctive about contextualism, then we might wonder how it differs from the non-contextualist theory that I will describe next. According to Stu, what recommends contextualism is its ability to solve the puzzle that arises from the following three propositions from which form an inconsistent set. C, if I know I have hands, then I know I'm not a brain in a vat. S for skeptical proposition. I do not know I'm not a brain in a vat. H for hands. I know I have hands. The contextualist solution to the puzzle goes like this, depending on whether an attributor is in a low or high standards context. She may either deny the skeptical proposition or assert the Hans proposition, or assert the skeptical proposition and deny the Hans proposition. Contextualism then is a package that consists of two parts. The first is a low standards / high standards response to the skeptical paradox. The second is a highly controversial semantic theory about the meaning / truth conditions of sentences containing what contextualists consider context-sensitive verbs. I think the first part of the package, unlike the second, is worth retaining. So let's consider an alternative theory that employs the low standards / high standards response to the skeptical puzzle, but drops the semantic baggage. This alternative is what we might call the multiple concepts theory. According to the multiple concepts theory, there are as many concepts of knowledge as there are different standards of knowledge. For the sake of simplicity, let's focus on just two. Cartesian knowledge, or knowledge sub C, and ordinary knowledge, knowledge sub O. If a subject is to have Cartesian knowledge of P, her evidence must eliminate any possibility of not P. If a subject is to have ordinary knowledge of P, her evidence must merely eliminate any reasonable doubt regarding P. Equipped with this distinction, the multiple concepts theorist will respond as follows to the inconsistent triad that makes up the skeptical paradox. When we are talking about knowledge, that is Cartesian knowledge, we must reject H, the Hans proposition. But that shouldn't be its setting, for Cartesian knowledge is not really what matters to us. The kind of knowledge we value is ordinary knowledge. If we didn't have ordinary knowledge of our hands, that would be upsetting. But when it comes to ordinary knowledge, we may retain the Hans proposition and deny the skeptical proposition. The gist of the multiple concepts reply to skepticism then is this. Regarding Cartesian knowledge, skepticism is correct but not worrisome. Regarding ordinary knowledge, skepticism is worrisome but not correct. According to Steup, a solution to the skeptical paradox succeeds only if it can explain why we feel we can give up H, the Hans proposition, and yet when considering the brain in the vat hypothesis, think that the skeptical proposition is true. In short, a successful solution to the paradox must explain why we find skepticism both crazy and compelling. Contextualism and the multiple concepts theory both do this by appealing to shifts in meaning. The multiple concepts theory, however, does not come with a semantic theory that assigns a significant role to conversational context. According to the multiple concepts theory, the dual nature of skepticism, its seeming combination of cogency and craziness, results from not shifts in conversational context, but the hidden ambiguity of the word no. Let's distinguish between transparent and hidden ambiguity. Consider the word pen. It means either writing instrument or enclosure for animals. This is transparent ambiguity, for context typically settles what a speaker means when using the word pen. In contrast, the word no is an instance of hidden ambiguity because ordinary speakers are not even aware of the distinction between Cartesian and ordinary knowledge. It's only after some exposure to epistemology that people grasp that there's a difference here. As a result, ordinary usage of the word no is unsettled, and thus ambiguous with regard to the low standards, high standards distinction. Unless we carefully attend to how different occurrences of the word no can differ in meaning, we may not realize that when we say we know we have hands and when we say we do not know we are not brains in vats, these utterances are true only if in each case a different concept of knowledge is employed. The failure to disambiguate between these concepts, so the multiple concepts theorist argues, makes skepticism look stronger than it really is. For if one fails to disambiguate, one might conclude erroneously that one doesn't know one has hands because one doesn't know one is not a brain in a vat. So according to the multiple concepts theory, the appeal of skepticism can be explained by pointing out that skepticism is correct, at least as far as Cartesian knowledge is concerned, and will be given more credit than it deserves when one fails to distinguish between Cartesian and ordinary knowledge. Next, let's focus on how the multiple concept theory differs from contextualism. First, there's a difference with regard to the semantics of know. According to the word know, according to contextualism, the word know is context sensitive. According to the multiple concept theory, know is not context sensitive, or at least not context sensitive to the degree contextualism asserts, but rather an example of hidden ambiguity. Second, there is a difference in the way contextualists and multiple concept theorists respond when confronted with a skeptical argument. Since the presentation of a skeptical argument creates a high standard context, a practitioner of contextualism must accept its conclusion. So the contextualist response is concessive. The multiple concept theorist, in contrast, rejects the skeptical argument as either invalid due to equivocation, unsound, because in the ordinary sense of know, we know skeptical hypotheses to be false, or sound but uninteresting, because when it comes to Cartesian knowledge, the skeptical conclusion is not disturbing. Third, the second point was the contextualist response when confronted with the skeptical argument is concessive, whereas the multiple concepts response is combative. Third, the two theories differ with regard to the assessment of skepticism. According to contextualism, skepticism enjoys genuine appeal and must be given its due. According to the multiple concepts theory, skepticism enjoys a false appeal that's due to equivocation. It should not be given more credit than it deserves. Fourth, according to contextualism, context is everything. According to the multiple concepts theory, context is largely irrelevant, for context does not constrain at all our ability to disambiguate between different meanings of know. Let's switch again to basketball. If Ted is 6'3" tall, we can correctly call him a tall person in any context, but a tall basketball player in none. Here, context is rendered irrelevant by disambiguating between tall persons and tall basketball players. Likewise, we can correctly say in any context that Stu has ordinary knowledge of his hands, but in no context can we say that he has Cartesian knowledge of his hands. Again, context is made irrelevant by making a conceptual distinction. Fifth, contextualists and multiple concept theorists differ with regard to the way they do epistemology. Contextualists do epistemology in a new way. It's epistemology after what we might call the semantic turn. The focus has shifted away from concepts and propositions to words and utterances. The multiple concept theorist, in contrast, does epistemology the old-fashioned way. They're interested in not sentences, but propositions, not words, but concepts. Propositions that attribute or deny knowledge. For evaluating the truth values of such propositions, context is not relevant. Stu defends contextualism on the ground that the solution to the skeptical paradox it offers us is better than the solutions offered by competing theories. This may be true for invariantism, according to which there is one and only one correct standard of knowledge. But I'm not sure that it's true for the multiple concept theory, which it seems to me handles the skeptical paradox as well as contextualism. As far as that paradox is concerned, I think both theories do equally well. But when it comes to the disquotational paradox and the problem of upward pressure resistance, then I think contextualism does less well than the multiple concept theory. To handle the disquotational paradox, Stu is forced to admit the possibility of using know in the low standard meaning in a high standard context. That strikes me as a significant deviation from the way contextualism was originally construed. The multiple concepts theory, on the other hand, has no problem at all with the disquotational paradox. A multiple concepts theorist will simply say this: if Lynn has ordinary knowledge in mind, then what she said is true, and what she said can be disquoted without saying anything false. If, on the other hand, she had Cartesian knowledge in mind, then what she said was false, and then she cannot be disquoted without saying something false. That's a straightforward application of what the multiple concepts theory is all about: conceptual disambiguation. Next, consider again the problem of upward pressure resistance. To handle it, Steup would have to explain how Chisholm managed to use the word no in a low standard sense in a context of salient error possibilities, in a context that contextualists typically consider a high standards context. Any such explanation significantly weakens the contextualist fork principle, which is the very principle contextualists need to resolve the skeptical paradox. The multiple concepts theory, on the other hand, handles the problem easily via disambiguation. Multiple concepts theorists would say that unrelenting anti-skeptics distinguish between ordinary and Cartesian knowledge and insist that they know in the ordinary sense, that they have hands and that they are not brains in vats. Again, that's a straightforward application of the chief device the multiple concepts theory employs: conceptual disambiguation. So in conclusion, I'd like to find out from Stu on what grounds he thinks that contextualism is preferable to the multiple concepts theory. Thank you.